Our passage today is in Luke 24, and I've gone a bit rogue today. I'm going to read the whole story. I'm going to start in verse 13. And it's a beautiful story known as the Walk to Emmaus. Artists have depicted it. It's really captured the hearts of so many, which is surprising because it's actually only told in the Gospel of Luke. Luke's the only one that tells this story. And it's about two disciples who are leaving Jerusalem on the road to Emmaus when they encounter a fellow traveler along the way. And here is the story. Now on the same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all the things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. And then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know that the things have taken place that are in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the third day since these things took place. And some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning. When they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." And then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are! How slow of heart to believe that all the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now over." So he went to stay with them. And when he was able, with them he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 and their companions gathered together. And they were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed. He has appeared to Simon." And then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been known to them in the breaking of the bread. Now, years ago, I had an opportunity to go visit the Holy Land, to go with a professor of mine who worked with an Israeli archaeologist, and we visited all kinds of historical sites from the Bible. It was amazing. We went to Jerusalem, Nazareth, Capernaum, Bethany. I walked on the road, the Via Dolorosa, where Jesus carried the cross, but I did not walk on any road to Emmaus. In fact, we did not go to any village called Emmaus, which is probably because no one knows where Emmaus was. All they know is it's 7 miles outside of Jerusalem, and even you could probably go to goisrael.com, and there are 3 sites that still to this day claim to be the location of the historic Emmaus. They don't really know, though. They don't know. My guess is it's probably because Emmaus was just some little dusty town, some sort of place where people give directions that say you turn left after the railroad tracks and make a right at the field with the donkey in it. Just a small one stoplight sort of town. And these 2 disciples were getting out of there. They were getting out of Dodge. Their hopes had been dashed in Jerusalem. They had probably been there to wave him into the city with palms and had watched him die, and the stone rolled in front of the tomb, and it was over. They were getting out of the city, headed to anywhere, probably. Emmaus was fine. It was 7 miles out of the city, maybe just far enough to outrun some of their heartache. And as they're walking on this road, a fellow traveler joins them on the way and asks them what they're talking about. And they basically tell him, have you been living under a rock? How do you not know what's happened in Jerusalem? This is what we're talking about. And while they're talking, this fellow new friend begins to talk about scriptures to them, starts revealing scriptures to them, like, this is what the prophets talked about. This is who Jesus is, that he would suffer. In fact, someone has this beautiful quote that says that the way you recognize the Christ and his followers is not by their muscles, but by their scars. This is who Jesus is. This traveler is telling them this. This is what to expect. And they are intrigued. They want to hear more. They invite their new friend to stay for dinner. And it's during that time that he takes bread, blesses it, and breaks it, that suddenly they realize who was in their midst the entire time. The risen Lord was with them. The blinders were off. There they were, on the road of dashed dreams and disappointments, and Jesus is there. They had lost all their hope in Jerusalem. And you know, we need hope. We need hope. You can go really far in life with just an ounce of hope. And to not have it is, I think, the hardest thing. We hope all the time. We hope for better days in this world with this pandemic. We hope for happier times for our friends and our loved ones. We hope for health and wellness. We hope for reconciliation. We hope for friends and loved ones to seek help and get treatment for addictions. We have hope. We cling to it. We need it. And when we don't have it, those two disciples were getting out of town because their hopes were over. We had hoped, they tell their fellow traveler. We had hoped, but it was over. And when Jesus reveals himself to them in the breaking of the bread, suddenly everything was changed. It's like taking the sunglasses off. Everything looked brighter. And he had been with them. He had been walking that road with them. And here's the thing, I don't mean to sound rude about it, but those two, they're nobodies. I mean, they're nobodies. One of them didn't even get their name remembered. How sad is that, to be that close to a powerful moment and no one remembers his name? And the other one is Cleopas, and if you search, you'll find that that's the only time we ever hear Cleopas mentioned. That's it. This is it. They're just average, everyday, Joe Schmo followers of Jesus, just average disciples. And Jesus comes to them. And Emmaus, well, I guess Emmaus can be anywhere, at any place, at any time. Because our risen Savior owns all the roads. He's on every path. C.S. Lewis had this beautiful quote where he said, God can use even the wrong road to get you to the right place. That's who Jesus is. He just keeps showing up and revealing himself to the people who often least expect it or even deserve it. He keeps showing up and revealing himself in scriptures that were written thousands and thousands of years ago, in a different culture and a different time and a different language and a different space. And yet those words still have the power to challenge us and inspire us and convict us time and time again. And he keeps revealing himself to us, sometimes in the form of a friend who will just try and come and walk beside you on that hard road. They don't try to take the pain away. They don't try to fix it because they can't. They just walk with you on the journey for a while to help you know that you do not walk this road alone. And he keeps coming to us and revealing himself to us in the breaking of the bread. Now, sometimes that bread looks a whole lot like a church lady casserole that could save your soul. Sometimes it comes in the form of a family meal with people who have seen you at your best and love you at your worst. With friends who say, you know, you'll always have a seat at the table. He keeps revealing himself in the breaking of the bread, maybe even sitting in pews, hearing words you've heard 1,000 times. On the night when Jesus was betrayed, he took a loaf of bread, blessed it and broke it. And you don't know why, but there's something about that moment, that time, that Sunday, where suddenly you got a knot in your throat. You are so overwhelmed by his grace and his mercy in your life, the gift of it, broken for you. In his book, Open Secrets, by Richard Lisher, he is a Lutheran pastor. He spent his vocational life, in the academy, teaching at seminary for the most part. And he wrote a book about the first, and it might be his only church that he ever served, and it was in southern Illinois, at one of those towns where you turn at the railroad tracks, make a right at the field with the donkey in it, sort of towns. And he writes about his very first funeral that he ever presided at after seminary, and it was for a man who was named Buster. He had been a mechanic, a good and faithful man who had died suddenly and unexpectedly and left behind his wife, who was pretty much drunk or high, depending on the time of day. And he writes about trying to plan this funeral with her and how it was just an utter disaster. She insisted on buying the most expensive casket she could for him, even though she didn't have any money to pay for it. And it was drama and conflict with all kinds of friends and relatives planning the service. And then she wailed loudly through the entire service, and he could barely speak over her. And he said by the time they were rolling the casket out, carrying it up the hill on the cemetery just out back of the church, he was ready to just call it a day and go home. And this is how he writes about the end of that funeral. He says, "Then the congregation moved to the little cemetery on the hill behind the church. The casket was lowered into the grave. I said the words of committal, and it was over, and the military phase was about to begin. 4 uniformed veterans from the local VFW formed an honor guard and fired their rifles on command 3 times over the head of the congregation. There was even a bugler for the occasion, 12-year-old Mariah, standing halfway up the hill in a pink jumper and a white sweater draped over her shoulders. Her new coronet caught the sunlight, and she was about to give the performance of her life. Her mother stood beside her to hold her music and steady her child like a doe and a fawn in the silence of the spring afternoon. And then Mariah began to play. She did not play taps. She played 4 stanzas of I Know That My Redeemer Liveth, arcing each note across the ravine toward the mourners on the hill. It was as if her music were a time-delayed message coming to us from a saner and more beautiful world, where the ordinary becomes holy, where everyday experiences become sacred, and at the unlikeliest moments, the risen Christ appears. Thanks be to God. Amen.